What's up, guys? Babs Money here with another episode of Dragatha Christie's Unsolved Mysteries. I have no idea what the fuck that voice was, but let me know, did you find it cunty? Today's look, I was inspired by Bratz dolls, but I wanted to make it Salvador Dali-esque, so I wanted to add like a melting eye and a teardrop and different eyebrows. And then my outfit. This is a hand-painted outfit by Vegas Van Dank. She put this together and hand-painted it. I borrowed it from her for this video because it makes me feel very Bratz dolly and cunty cunt cunt. Today we will be discussing the murder of Athalia Ponzell Lindsley. Athalia Ponzell Lindsley was murdered Wednesday, January 23rd, 1974. So about 46 and a half years ago. And this occurred in St. Augustine, Florida. St. Augustine is famous for being Florida's oldest city. However, in January of 1974, St. Augustine was about to be famous for an entirely different reason. One of the grisliest murders the town had ever seen. We're talking about the unsolved murder of Athalia Ponzell Lindsley. Athalia Lindsley was born in the year 1917 to a wealthy family in Toledo, Ohio, and was raised on the Isle of Pines in the Caribbean Sea. Ain't that some shit? Not only do you grow up rich, but you live on a fucking island. Well, I guess she wasn't that lucky, considering she got gooped. She ended up spending 20 years in New York, where she was a model, a chorus line dancer, as well as a hostess on Bud Collier's television game show Winner Takes All. And speaking of all, that is basically what Athalia had. All. Athalia Lindsley was that bitch. At one time, she was even engaged to Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., but he died while on active duty during World War II. So, I guess with the good, she had her fair share of the bad. Gotta take the good with the bad, and sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. And you gotta deal with the cookie. You gotta deal with that cookie, girl. She made a bid for state senator even, but was ultimately unsuccessful. Sorry, Afi. Not Afi. I'm sure if she had any nickname, it was probably Thalia or Leah, not Addie And she also had plans to run for a seat on the St. Johns County Commission in Florida, where she lived, where this happened. Duh. Y'all like my little call-in sound? I discovered it when I was making my yogurt shop murders video, and now I have discovered that it is the sound that God has given me to strike fear into the hearts of men. Do you hear that, America? Do you hear what I hear on the track? 4 months prior to Athalia's murder, she married a former St. Augustine mayor by the name of James, aka Jinx Lindsley, who was a very successful real estate agent at this time. Making the coin! She said, hey, my first baby might have got shot down like Nancy Sinatra was talking about. But guess what, baby? I found another one. Now, here's the gag of the season. Despite the fact that they were married, and recently married at that, they resided in 2 different homes. She lived on the Matanzas River at 124 Marine Street. He alternatively used the historic Harrowing house at 214 St. George Street and another one on Lou Boulevard on Anastasia Island. Like I said, this struck me as a bit odd that they're recently married at that. And they're not even living together. Fuck you is what it looks like to me. Let's get into the day she got slashed down like the stock market, bitch. On Wednesday, January 23rd, 1974, Jinx Lindsley left his wife at 5:30 in the afternoon. The evening, if you will. Miss Thing. Almost an hour later, around 6:10, an 18-year-old neighbor by the name of Locke McCormick looked out his window towards the Lindsley home and witnessed what appeared to be a man raising and lowering his arm repeatedly as if striking something. Oh? Young Mr. McCormick then ran outside and witnessed a white middle-aged man with a white dress shirt and dark dress pants walking away from the front steps of the Lindsley residence, leaving a crumpled body on the bottom step. Mr. McCormick sprinted back into his home and told his mother, quote, "Mr. Stanford is hitting Mrs. Lindsley," end quote. Well, who the fuck is this Mr. Stanford? Who is hitting Miss Lindsley, you might ask? Well, Diva, we gonna get into that because this is some shenanigans. Also, starting a little early in this video, but it took me a lot to get this together. Took a lot of breaks, actually, too, because I'm a piece of shit. With that being said, it's time for me to inhale the gig. After the perpetrator left, the McCormicks went next door and saw Mrs. Lindsley lying in a pool of blood, and they called 911. Of course. Like, if you didn't, what the fuck's wrong with you, bitch? The St. Augustine Police Department was notified around 6:12, which just shows you how quickly this happened. 6:10 is when Locke McCormick saw this bitch getting her ass gooped by this man, like, whoop, 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 baby, this whoop, baby. By 2 minutes later, they was like, y'all better come, this bitch crumpled up on the steps. Ooh! And mind you, it was already apparent that resuscitation would be pointless, because when they found her, this bitch had been attacked with a machete. That's what he saw Mr. Thing over there bopping and whopping with. A machete? Like, who the fuck do you think you are, Jason fucking Voorhees? Although this was in the 70s, so they didn't know about him yet. Maybe he inspired it. Did I just crack the goop? Medical examiner Dr. Arthur Schwartz stated that Mrs. Lindsley, quote, was struck 9 times with a machete on her hand, arm, and head. One of her fingers was severed and she was nearly decapitated, end quote. Not only does this bitch get murdered, the son of a bitch turns her into nearly headless Nicole. What the fuck's up with that, goopy? Now, despite these grievous wounds, the initial investigation reported no signs of a struggle. No shit, because he was whooping her ass outside. Her husband found nothing missing inside the house except for a baby blue jay that she had been nursing back to health, and the cage that the bird had been kept in was described as smashed. So somebody gooped her ass and stole her bird. A bird that she was just trying to help, and they said, no, she gotta go too. St. Johns County Sheriff Dudley Garrett began investigating this Mr. Stanford that Locke McCormick had mentioned, and discovered it was St. Johns County Manager Alan G. Stanford, who just so happened to be Athalia Lindsley's neighbor. It is no secret that before Athalia's death, there was a very contentious relationship between she and Mr. Stanford. Mainly, they had been involved in previous disputes over their adjoining property. He lived at 126 Marine Street. One of the concerns brought up was the 6 stray dogs that Mrs. Lindsley had taken in, and how Mr. Stanford claimed they barked incessantly. Athalia had also appeared 5 times before the county commission board to complain about Stanford's recent raise on the grounds that he was not certified as an engineer in the state of Florida, but was signing documents as a city engineer. Very legitimate complaints. If you ain't who you say you are, you need to stop playing them games. Cut it. This is not appropriate, she's saying. And we know it. We agree with you, Athalia. You were right on track with that shit. In a transcript of an October 1973 county meeting, one of the commissioners had remarked, quote, I am aware you are a neighbor of the Stanfords and that y'all have had neighbor problems, end quote. Mrs. Lindsley answered, quote, that's true, but my life has been threatened. You mentioned personal things. He threatened my life, end quote. This left the question, was all of this enough for Alan G. Stanford to take a machete and nearly decapitate Athalia Lindsley on her own front steps? On February 17th, County Mechanic Dewey Lee alerted Sheriff Garrett to what he believed to be the murder weapon in a marsh that was a few miles from the murder scene. So this mechanic is like, hey, remember that lady that got her head gooped? That shit over here, bruh. Come see it. I know you want to. And he did. And upon inspection, the men found a machete, a wristwatch, dark blue pants and a white shirt, and a purple tie. And this was all wrapped up in a pink towel. So the murder weapon, clothes that matched the description of what the attacker was wearing. What's the tea? Chrissy, Miss God. That's also kind of suspicious, Dewey. Did you have something to do with the shit? What's the fucking tea? What is it, doo-doo? There were also bloodstains on the items, and there was blonde hair found on the machete and trousers. And I ain't gotta tell you that this bitch had blonde hair. Now, it was Assistant State Attorney Richard Watson that prosecuted Alan Stanford, believing that he was guilty and that he had murdered Mrs. Lindsley due to their notorious squabbles. Bitch, I don't blame him. Makes a whole lot of sense to me, Alan. Kind of shit are you on, Miss Thing? Over here trying to chop a bitch's head off because she didn't like you and was speaking tea. Okay, word up. Now, the wristwatch they found could be traced back to Stanford because of serial numbers from the jeweler. It was also discovered that Alan's wife, Patricia, had bought him the shirt and trousers on June 16th, 1973, about a half a year before Athalia's murder. At trial, the defense claimed that 5 people saw Mr. Stanford in his office between 6 and 7 p.m. on the day of the murder. He claimed that he was double-checking permits to be mailed and also studying for his engineering registration. Really convenient. That was one of the things she clocked, and that was what you were there doing, allegedly, when she got gooped. Gooped. Please. Now, Stanford's parents testified that the clothing could have been planted. By whom? Patricia. Furthermore, Mr. McCormick stated that he later realized that the attacker had more hair and broader shoulders than the 150-pound Stanford. Girl, you don't know what the hell you saw. You swore up and down it was Mr. Stanford, and then you said, oh, wait, it wasn't. Stanford's lawyer, Edward Booth, launched a closing argument that, quote, investigators were hell-bent on getting Mr. Stanford, end quote, to the detriment of justice. Booth maintained that neither James Lindsley, Dewey Lee, nor anyone else were investigated thoroughly enough. Not as much as Mr. Stanford was, anyway. On February 3rd, 1975, after just 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury acquitted Alan Stanford of murder. The prosecuting attorney stated in disbelief, quote, it would amaze me if anybody could go through that evidence in 2.5 hours, end quote. The Panama City News-Herald remarked, quote, during that time, the 8 men and 4 women jurors elected a foreman, ate a meal that was brought into them, they didn't even have to go get the shit, and considered a verdict, end quote. Mind you, my little ad-lib was not in the quote, but I think you knew that. So yeah, in 2.5 hours, you ate your lunch, went over the evidence, talked about it, and decided he wasn't guilty. Good to the fucking bye, bitch. Sheriff Garrett proclaimed, quote, yes, I think he did it. I signed the complaint against him, and I don't concur with the verdict. If I'd been on the jury, I think I could have filled it in from the evidence and testimony, end quote. No further developments are known, and Lindsley's murder is still classified as unsolved. 3 people involved have since passed away. Athalia's husband, James Lindsley, died about 9 years later in 1983. Henry Deward, aka Dewey Lee, the county mechanic that discovered the murder weapon and other items, passed away in 1997. And Alan G. Stanford, the prime suspect, passed away about 14 years ago in 2006. And that is all the information we have in the murder of Athalia Ponzel Lindsley. So let's get into it, because I have a lot of opinions. I do believe that Alan Stanford was the one that murdered her. I believe that beyond a shadow of a doubt. What I have questions about are if anyone else was involved. I think it's really fishy that she gets killed not even half a year after she marries her husband. And it wouldn't be as fishy to me if it weren't for the fact that they didn't live together either. I thought that was really strange. So did he put Stanford up to it? Did someone else do it entirely, but it was still James Lindsley having them do it? Was it James Lindsley and he just somehow got away with it? And then, you know, the theory that maybe Dewey Lee had something to do with it because it was so suspicious to people that out of the blue he just finds the murder weapon and the attacker's clothes in a marsh somewhere. And it makes you think, if you think about my other videos, he worked for the county. So if he did have something to do with it, it's not that far-fetched to say he would have had help covering it up. Someone to help him stay off the radar. so to speak. But in my mind, I truly think that Mr. Stanford killed her that day. The clothes that were found with the murder weapon were bought by Stanford's wife. Then again, if someone else did it, they could have planted the clothes like Mr. Stanford's parents said. But my question is, who could have done it other than his wife or someone else that lived in his home? Do you see that? Look, that's my boyfriend. Do you like him?
Don't look at me.
But, alas, this case has come to an end. What you guys want me to talk about next? I do have a case. I am going to cover a case from my hometown that happened about 12 years ago. But, with that being said, I can hear the roommates watching the Drag Race All-Stars 5. So I gotta get the fuck out of here, bitch. As always, I am Mabs Money, aka Dragatha Christie, and I am signing off for now. Good night, hoes. Good night, moon. Good night, bear in the big blue house, you fat ass. Bye-bye. Until next time, money chasers. Wham!